I discovered terrifying secrets in a haunted Mexican TV series that left me paralyzed. I never should have opened that door. The fear hit me like a wave, cold and suffocating. Why did I think I could handle it? My everyday life, quiet and uneventful, shattered in an instant the moment I pressed play on that series. The screen flickered, shadows danced, and a chill crept down my spine as I lingered on the first episode. It was dark in my little room. The only light came from the TV, casting eerie shapes on the walls. My hands trembled as I reached for the remote, the plastic warm against my skin. I could almost hear whispers curling through the air, tickling my ears, urging me to listen closer. The atmosphere weighed heavy, thick with anticipation. Suddenly, strange noises erupted from the speakers. Voices speaking in hushed tones, echoing my thoughts and fears. I leaned in, captivated, but every heartbeat screamed at me to turn back. I should have known better than to delve into a forbidden story. As I watched, objects in my room began to shift, moving just enough to catch my eye. My heart raced. The shadows stretched, reaching like fingers toward me, and the air crackled with a tension that made my skin crawl. I glanced over my shoulder. No one was there. Just me, and the haunted screen flickering with secrets better left alone. The series unfolded, revealing chilling truths. Ghostly figures appeared on screen, their faces familiar yet twisted. I was no longer just a spectator. It felt personal. The protagonist's fate mirrored my own, thrusting me into a whirlwind of dread. I could feel the pulse in my throat, a tightness growing with every passing moment. I gasped as the plot thickened, revealing more terror than I could bear. Each scene yanked me deeper into despair. I reached for my phone, hands slick with sweat. Was I ready to expose my own secrets? The anticipation was maddening, clawing at my composure. And then silence. The TV stuttered, a sharp inhale filling the room. I held my breath, expecting a crescendo of screams. Instead, a soft shuffle echoed from behind me. I froze. Was it just the show or something more? I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. A figure loomed at the edge of the dim light, too tall, too still. I could barely breathe, my chest tightening like a vice. The room we seemed to share suddenly felt immense and suffocating. Everything went dark. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. A weight pressed against my chest as darkness enveloped me, the chill now spilling into my bones, paralyzing me in more than just fear. The air burned with the smell of something acrid and decayed, and beneath that, a familiar scent I couldn't see, a rancid sweetness that clawed at my memories. My heart thudded painfully in my ears as I fumbled in the absolute void for the remote, desperate for even a glimmer of light or sound to pull me back from this sinister abyss. But as I groped through the gloom, my fingers brushed against something warm and slick. I recoiled, my pulse quickening, and even as I willed myself to scream, I managed only a whimper. The sensation was all too real. Flesh, alive and pulsing, pressed against mine. What kind of aberration was this? I forced my eyes open, battling the encroaching fear. The edges of the darkness shimmered with fleeting shadows, twisting and writhing like the souls tortured on the screen moments before. I shifted backward, my mind refusing to accept what my senses told me. And then, just as I thought I might succumb completely to terror, a flicker of light returned. The TV buzzed back to life, its signal crackling like static electricity in my skull. The screen, however, betrayed the safety I had sought. It flickered indecisively before settling on an immediate close-up of the protagonist, her eyes wide and pleading, tears streaming down her face. The story played out with haunting resonance. Behind her, something moved, a dark figure slinking into the frame, just out of sight. Lighting flickered over it in a dance of insanity. As the girl gasped, I felt a sharp breath against my neck, hot and fetid. I closed my eyes, clenching my fists. The moment seemed to last an eternity until I forced myself to look again. But this time the room was different. It was no longer just me and the TV. I felt a presence hovering above me, smothering me with dread. Suddenly, the figure from before materialized in the fuzzy light. Its shape, grotesque and misshapen, resembled everything I feared about the world. Malice and despair wrapped like thin skin around a skeletal frame. It leaned closer, breath cold like winter air on my cheek. Each shallow intake echoed in the silence. My heart threatened to implode from sheer panic. With trembling hands, I swung the remote wildly, desperate to change the channel, to escape. Instead, the very essence of the series crashed into me with sharp clarity, the voices from the show now emerging from the shadows. They whispered insidiously, their words twisting like razor blades in my mind, drumming a foreboding rhythm of curses and sorrow. The walls began to throb with a life of their own, shadows stretching and contracting, as if trying to escape a tightening grip. "You should not have come here," a voice echoed through the dark, filled with twisted glee as though it danced just out of reach of my senses. I bolted upright, pushing against the terror consuming me. I stumbled back, a desperate retreat from the realities unraveling around me. The walls shimmered with silhouettes of those the series had claimed, their tortured faces spilling out in agony, echoing my own struggle. I wanted to scream, to wake up from this nightmare. Instead, I could feel the chilling satisfaction of something that thrived on my fear. Then, from the corner, a faint glow caught my eye. Glancing back at the screen, I realized the protagonist was turning toward me, her expression twisting in a mix of horror and understanding. "Help me," she mouthed, silently yelling through the screen, her eyes wide with desperation. I reached for the TV, my fingers brushing against the glass. It felt warm yet electric, vibrating with the force of the horror contained within. My hand sank through, and as I gasped and pulled back, the darkness enveloped me once again, but now I felt something different, a pull of the souls trapped, clawing for release. My heart raced as the light dimmed, and I prepared to flee when suddenly I froze. The faint, echoing laughter reverberated through the room, that same chilling malice now taunting me, the darkness pulling me back toward the screen. And just like that, I felt fingers grip my wrist, cold as ice, dragging me further into the void that I so desperately tried to escape. With tears streaming down my face, I turned to run, only to discover the darkness was alive. It was a breath, a presence circling me, and as I plunged headfirst into the abyss, I realized it was only the beginning. The shadows thickened around me, swallowing my screams before they could form. My heart pounded like an animal trapped in a snare, an echoing drum in the suffocating stillness. I twisted and turned, fighting against the invisible hands that sought to pull me into an unforgiving grip. The cacophony of whispered voices grew, merging in a twisted chorus of past sins and lamentations. I stumbled deeper into the room, desperate to stay on the periphery of whatever horror had claimed the TV as its vessel. The walls seemed to pulse with a will of their own, closing in like the jaws of a predatory animal. Yet, there was another presence, lurking just beyond my viscera, a feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes taking pleasure in my fear. "Help me." The words were a siren's call, a pulse of hope and despair woven into one. The face of the protagonist hovered, ghostly and fervent, her eyes now wide with a pleading grimace that sent shards of ice through my veins. How could I help when I couldn't save myself? As I struggled, I knocked over a lamp, its glass shattering against the floor, sending sparks of light that momentarily illuminated the dark. For a flickering instant, I glimpsed the shadows morphing, crafting surreal and anguished face-me neighbors, my friends' lost souls drawn by the malevolence of this ruined series. But it wasn't just a projection. Their mouths opened in silent screams, drowned out by the growing din of the TV, the figures moving in grotesque simulation of life, an orchestra of despair. The girl on the screen fell to her knees, hands pressed against the glass, her lips forming a soundless warning, "Don't look away." But as terror clawed at my mind, I felt fatigue take hold. I was losing stability. The boundaries of reality blurred as the shadows encroached upon me like smoke, suffocating and insistent. I collapsed against the wall, gasping for air, my eyes darting for any escape. Then a low growl rolled through the air, igniting the hairs on the back of my neck. A shape emerged from the shadows, a hallowed figure cloaked in darkness, impossibly tall and thin, an impossibility defying normal proportions. Its eyes red and luminous burned through the veil, pinning me with an ancient hunger. "Do you wish to join them?" It rasped, the words curling around me like serpentine coils. "They are waiting for you, you know." I fought to catch my breath, the urgency of my peril crashing over me like a chaotic wave. My instinct screamed for me to look away, to resist the malevolence that beckoned, but dread chained my gaze to that twisted being. Its limbs elongated and jerked unnaturally as if it were trying to mimic human movement, each motion drenched in mockery. "Join them," the voice repeated, more dominant, now echoing within my mind, mingling with all the voices from the TV, all coalescing into one horrifying realization. Each story I had ever watched, every soul who had emerged from the dark screen had not just vanished. They had become part of something far worse. In my imagination, I saw a wall, the faces drawn in anguish forever, crafted into its surface, their bodies writhing, trapped in torment. A monument to the Seriesno, a tomb, a graveyard of all who had been caught in that insidious web. Then the protagonist, that desperate figure, rose once more, pushing against the glass as if reaching for me, her eyes wide with something new, wrath. Clenching her fists against the screen, I witnessed a shift. The shadows trembled around her, as if in retaliation to an unseen force that had bound her there. "No. You can't take him," she screamed without sound, gasping in terror at something behind me, something that my eyes couldn't yet perceive. Then I felt it, a shift in the air, a palpable change, something icy creeping up the back of my neck, the source of all my fears, manifested and colossal, looming closer until every rational thought dimmed under the onslaught of sheer dread. Desperate now, I clawed at the carpet, pulling myself backward, and as I turned to sprint for the door, I felt an unbearable pressure bearing down on me. It was as if the very air was trying to wrap around my throat like a noose, choking every ounce of life from my body. I stumbled, falling against the wall, and at that moment, the laughter erupted again, smooth and silky, echoing through me, spilling into every corner of my mind. I turned, breathless, looking back at the TV screen, which had now distorted into a swirling vortex of agonizing faces. Suddenly, a piercing light shot through, blinding me momentarily, casting grotesque long shadows against the walls and reflecting in the glass fragments scattered across the floor. When I regained my vision, the figure was gone, and thick silence enveloped the room, as if breathing had ceased. But that silence was merely the calm before the storm, a delay before the inevitable onset of terror. My reflection in the TV, however, had changed. I didn't see myself. Instead, I saw the countless others who had been claimed, their expressions frozen in a ghastly mimicry of life. I gasped, horror flooding my senses as their mouths curled into horrific smiles, beckoning me to join them within the confines of that cursed reality, and just as a sense of despair began to settle around me, the lights flickered and the screen blinked rapidly, the piercing laugh echoing once more, only now it whispered distinctly, "Welcome home." The wave hit, overwhelming my senses, and in the final moments of clarity, I realized what it meant to be truly lost. Then everything went dark. I awoke to silence, swathed in darkness that pressed against me like a heavy blanket. The chill in the air, sharp enough to cut flesh, wrapped around my limbs, rendering them numb and inert. I strained my eyes, trying to make sense of my surroundings, but the shadows lay thick, barricading my view. Panic surged within me, a consuming tide, and I forced myself to sit upright. My pulse echoed in my ears, a frantic reminder that I was still alive, still tethered to this realm. There was an uncomfortable sensation that tickled at the edges of my consciousness, a ghostly whisper slithering through the cracks of my mind, mocking me. "Not yet," it teased. "You're not finished." I struggled to my feet, my body feeling as though it were encased in lead. My heart raced as I tried to retrace my steps, to remember how I had gotten here. Had I truly been in that room, standing before the TV? Or was it all a horrible figment, a curse that clung to my thoughts like the remnants of a nightmare? Gradually, I made my way forward, an unwilling traveler through the oppressive darkness. I reached out, the cool plaster wall grounding me, guiding me through the haunting void. Images of those trapped faces flashed through my mind, igniting terror anew. How could they still haunt me? I stumbled past the spot where the TV had been, but felt an unsettling void, as if my very spirit had been sucked into it. The air felt alive, whispering secrets that curled in on themselves like tendrils of smoke. I dared not look back, fearing what I might see, but I could feel Ida pressure, gathering force just behind me, pulsing with malevolence. Turning sharply, I caught a flicker of movement, a shadow darting in my peripheral vision. My breath caught in my throat as panic clawed at my insides. "No," I whispered, willing the figure to dissipate. "Leave me be." But the shadows beckoned, alive with malice, encircling me in a bold dance. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a tangle of wires, a reminder of my brush with the otherworldly. As I fought for balance, I caught a glimpse of the TV, which had reappeared against the wall, flickering to life, the screen filled with static, each crackle like a sinister laugh. "Why do you resist?" It seemed to chide, the vague spectral form of the protagonist materializing once more, her eyes wide, shimmering with tears that flowed like liquid despair. The walls throbbed, as if breathing along with the wretched emotion pouring from her. If I focused closely, I could almost hear her sobs, the keening of a soul longing for release. I glared at the screen, horror morphing into defiance. "I want to be like them," I declared, though the tremor in my voice betrayed me. The flickering images surged, forming a kaleidoscope of the lost souls, each mouth curled in a silent scream of laughter, their joy stripped bare by a monstrous, insatiable greed for life. "Join us," they mouthed in unison, the words spilling forth like a dark melody, coaxing me to step closer, to surrender to the darkness enveloping the room. They beckoned with skeletal hands, some reaching for me, others grasping at the air, trying to escape their eternal prison. No. I screamed, a primal roar that filled the void and shattered whatever fragile peace had settled around me. They receded, fading just beyond the flickering light, but their calls dragged against my psyche like claws on glass, scratching at the remnants of my sanity. That's when I noticed the air shift again, a temperature dropped so sudden it knocked the breath from my lungs. It swung wildly from frigid to scorching, as if the room itself were caught in a cosmic battle. Out of the corners of my eyes, impossible shapes began coalescing, figures smeared in darkness, blending seamlessly into the shadows, remnants of those who had fallen prey to this abhorrent nightmare. "Do you wish to be reborn?" croaked an empty voice, rasping so close I felt the breath against my skin. I gasped, my body flooding with an unnatural chill, every instinct screaming to turn away, yet I was rooted to the spot, riveted by the encroaching horror. Before I could muster the will to scream again, an ethereal hand shot forward from the formless mass, grasping for my racing heart. Just as chilling fingers closed around the warmth beneath my ribcage, a blinding light exploded from the TV, erupting into 1,000 shards of raw luminosity that scattered like searing stars, illuminating the long-abandoned room. In that overwhelming brightness, I saw the figure of the protagonist, still trapped but now, with a sense of urgency in her gaze. "You need to leave. Now!" she cried, her voice piercing through the cacophony. And then the room imploded with darkness, swallowing the light like a hungry beast, and I felt the hands of those lost souls grip my limbs, drawing me backward into the void with their desperate pull. As my back met the cold wall, a cacophony of screams assaulted my ears, a horrifying symphony of anguish erupting from within the surface of the TV. The shadows shivered, thrumming with an electric charge, the weight of their pleading saturating the air as their twisted faces melded into one grotesque countenance. "Welcome home," it crooned again, dragging me closer to the brink of oblivion, where every hope dissipated like smoke. I felt the barrier of my last defenses weaken, fracturing under the relentless pressure. A split second of clarity hid me, a voice sharper and more desperate than the rest. "Do not give in, fight." But as I fought to haul myself back from the precipice, I was thrust into chaos, the walls erupting in a kaleidoscope of faces, hands tethering me to what awaited beyond. The protagonist's scream morphed into a frantic roar, and my own voice joined the cacophony as I slipped deeper into the abyss, on the very verge of surrender. Darkness engulfed me, leaving only one haunting question: what if I was never meant to escape? And just before I lost myself entirely, the last thing I saw was a hand reaching through, cold and unyielding, closing around my throat. The grip around my throat tightened, a sensation more chilling than I had ever experienced. As I gasped for air, an inky darkness pressed against my chest like a weight too heavy to bear. In those fleeting moments, every doubt, every fear coalesced into a singular thought: this was the end. But then, the darkness flickered like distant stars igniting in a boundless void. I could see the outlines of the figures, twisted and tormented, their shapes blurring between the tangible and unreal. They weren't just souls lost. They were a collective, an entity fueled by despair, a monstrous amalgamation demanding my compliance. "Join us!" they moaned, their voices dripping with venom and desperation. The sheer force of their despair wrapped around me, pulling me deeper, deeper. I was no longer just an observer, I was prey. I thought, a roaring defiance igniting within my gut. I couldn't give in, not now. Summoning every ounce of strength, I clawed at the unyielding darkness, fighting against the grip that felt as if it would shatter my bones. It was a battle, not just of body but of will. Not yet. I screamed against the pressure. With one final push, I turned, aiming for the brightest glimmer beyond the reach of those grasping hands. The crawl space of light pulsed, a heartbeat resonating with my own. I thrust myself towards it, a desperate leap against the tide of shadows. The moment I broke free, the world shifted again, the grotesque faces of the lost fading momentarily, as the light enveloped me. I tumbled through, landing in an unfamiliar room, a structure that felt both alien and achingly familiar. A single dim bulb swung overhead, casting ghostly shadows across the grimy walls, revealing peeling wallpaper that dripped like congealed blood. Scrambling to my feet, I realized I was back in the house from which I had first fled, the original source of my nightmares. The TV lay shattered on the floor, shards sprinkled like confetti across the cold tile. But something more terrifying echoed in the air. Silence. Overcome with dread, I prayed my escape had freed me, but the subsequent stillness spoke a language I had come to dread. I tiptoed through the derelict space, my heart thudding painfully in my chest, each beat a reminder of the entities I had just encountered. Fingers grazed the wall, seeking any markers of reality, any sign that my frantic flight had been more than a fever dream. But it was the faint smell of decay rising from beneath the floorboards that captured my focus, not a mere remnant of neglect, but something living, something malevolent. Fear snagged on my throat like a barbed hook. "Hello?" I called, hard hammering as the shadows crept closer. My voice reverberated back in whispers, mingling with a soft moan that ebbed from the lower level. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled as I moved toward the staircase leading down into darkness, where the air thickened with a palpable presence. With each cautious step, the groaning of the staircase echoed like warning bells, but the moan continued, urging me forth. Help me! It floated up from the depths, recognizable but twisted like that of the protagonist from the cursed show, distorted in pain. I know who you are. Just as I reached the final step, the light flickered more violently, revealing the contours of a face I recognized all too well. It was hers, but not the soft, pleading face I had seen before. This visage was harsher, eyes wild with a haunting insanity, lips curled back almost in a snarl. "Why did you come back?" she spat, a venomous question slithering from the depths of her throat. My heart sank, an anchor dragging me back toward despair. But before I could respond, the shadows surged, wrapping around her, pulling her into a cascade of darkness that swallowed the light whole. Her desperate scream ripped through the silence, melding with the echoes of anguish that had defined this place. The sound felt as if it were clawing at my very soul. No! I shouted, lunging forward, my instincts screaming, as if the very fabric of reality was fraying around me. But the shadows were too strong, the whispers echoing louder as they merged with her, calling out for me to join. "Don't resist. Embrace it," they taunted, a grotesque celebration of my impending doom. Something shattered in me. A choice materialized out of the despair. I could either succumb to this madness or confront it in a way I hadn't dared before. A luminescent warmth unfurled within my heart, a fierce resolve igniting. I would not allow myself to be consumed. Without thinking, I screamed her name into the void, hoping against hope that she might somehow hear me through the despair overwhelming us both. "I'm here. Fight. We can escape." But before anything could happen, a blinding pain pierced through my very core, and as my vision began to fade, the last lingering thought that wrapped around me like a garrote was a single chilling whisper breathed my name, a promise and a threat intertwined. Suddenly, the ground beneath me trembled, and as I made one final, desperate grasp at existence, the world shattered into fragments, leaving only the sound of her cries echoing through the endless void. In the new darkness, I felt the distinct sensation of my heartbeat fading into silence, but I was not yet finished. The horror was only just beginning. The ground throbbed with a low rumble, a sinister heartbeat that surged beneath the oppressive darkness. I hovered in the void, trapped in the periphery of consciousness, disoriented but inexplicably aware that I was not alone. Shapes flickered in the shadows, barely visible yet unmistakably there, creeping closer as they murmured among themselves in warped, hollow voices, lamenting their unyielding fates. A cold sweat coated my skin, and the scent of decay thickened the air, now suffocatingly rancid. Yet amid the nightmare, a haunting resonance flooded my mind, echoing like the last vestiges of a dream. "We know you. You will join us." Suddenly, I was thrust back into corporeal form, the blinding light shattering everything around me like glass, each shard cutting into the fabric of reality. Gasping, I found myself sprawled on a dirt floor, damp and cold, the stench of mold overpowering. I blinked, and the shapes around me melted into the stillness, only to reshape themselves into familiar silhouettes still tethered to the demented energy of the house. Yet in this moment, another force tugged at my consciousness, a desperate wail reverberating through me. With instinct overpowering rational thought, I bolted upright, dizzy and confused. "Her name!" I gasped, the weight of recognition crashing down, a name that echoed with the promise of liberation, yet was shackled by the burden of despair. Scrambling backward, I hit the wall, my pulse quickening as a sudden flicker of light illuminated part of the chamber. The corners of the room flickered in and out of focus, like a dying flame struggling against darkness. In this heartbeat of clarity, I spotted an old mirror hanging crookedly, its surface marred but still reflecting something, or someone behind me. Swallowing the entreaty of terror rising in my throat, I turned slowly. I felt hot breath on my neck, its warmth chilling me to the bone. My heart raced as dread clawed at my stomach. There stood a figure draped in shadows, their face obscured by a cowl of eyeless horror. "You should not have come," the figure hissed, its voice thick with despair yet laced with a grotesque sweetness. I staggered back, caught off balance by the sight altogether familiar and alien. "Who are you?" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper as their dark shape loomed closer, jaw unhinging in a horrific grin that splintered into unnatural twisted laughter. It wrapped around me, spiraling like a noose. "Remember your past?" it taunted, the very air vibrating with its derision. "Remember what you attempted to forget?" Images swirled around me, fragments of long-buried memories igniting. The abandoned house, the screams, the gnarled fingers grasping towards me from within the walls. I once thought I had escaped, but like a predator lying in wait, my past had returned, stalking me relentlessly. Those familiar voices whispered again, weaving around me, each word dripping with a taint of malice. "Help us, or we will consume you," they beckoned, the ambient echoes a cacophony of mockery and impending doom. Desperation clawed at my insides. I fought to regain my footing, but the shadows warped and twisted at my feet, latching onto my ankles like a hungry beast. In that moment, something shifted in the atmosphere, an overwhelming dread that pulsed with a furious intensity. "You must choose," the figure chanted, now vibrating closer, pulling me into its essence. A singular thought pierced through my panic. I could not let this shadow consume me as it had so many others. Summoning the last vestiges of bravery, I grasped the emotion within me, resolve that had not yet been extinguished. "No! I will not be part of your torment!" I shouted toward the faceless horror, but the shadows snapped back, and the figure lunged toward me, its form exploding into a myriad of smudged whispers. The air thickened around me, as the room began to shudder violently. It felt as if the very foundations were collapsing, the walls drawing closer, suffocating me with the weight of their history. Ignoring the suffocating atmosphere, I leapt at the mirror as my escape, hoping against hope that reality might relent, that the world outside the glass might shimmer into clarity once more. A cacophony of laughter mingled with screaming surged through the room, tearing at my sanity as I crashed toward the reflective surface. Glass shattered outward, and for an ephemeral moment, there was brightness of blinding brilliance that washed over my face, illuminating every shadow and hidden truth. Just as I raced to break through, two agonizingly familiar hands grasped my wrists from within, pulling me back as if I were a marionette unto their whims. "Stay!" they screamed in unison, their faces twisted into a frenzied longing. Her face, contorted in agony, twisting into shades of my own reflection. The darkness surged around me, an ocean of despair and fury, and I realized with mounting horror that I had only just begun to unravel the depths of the nightmare. The truth awaited just beyond a threshold I had yet to reach, and as my grip weakened, I found myself once more teetering at the brink, caught between the promises of freedom and the chains of dread. Then, with a final surge of energy, I felt something slip into my mind, another horrifying thought latching onto my consciousness. What if the true darkness was not the specter surrounding me, but something far worse lurking within? The room imploded into a shroud of darkness, and as shadows consumed everything, an anguished scream broke for the piercing wail that echoed long after I was plunged into silence. The echoes of the anguished scream reverberated in my skull as I tumbled into the suffocating void. My body spun in a silken darkness, weightless and unable to grasp what terror awaited me on the other side. Memories twisted and reformed like a grotesque kaleidoscope, snippets of laughter, the scent of lilacs, and the shadow of a woman I could never forget. Each fragment bore the weight of regret and longing, taunting me with truths I had spent years trying to outrun. Suddenly, I collided with a hard surface, crumpling onto what felt like an uneven floor. The remnants of light I had glimpsed vanished, plunging me into a dense fog that swirled about, thick and oppressive. Gasping, I strained to orient myself, my fingers curling around damp, rotting wood beneath me. A faint flicker ignited nearby, and I squinted toward it, discovering a ghostly figure standing a few feet away. Its form shimmered, wavering like a mirage, and I fought to stifle the rising panic clutching my chest. The figure morphed, taking the shape of a woman, her eyes pools of midnight, hollow yet piercing through the darkness. "Help me," she rasped, her voice a raw tremor that slashed at the fraying edges of my sanity. I could see the agony etched across her face, a portrait of suffering suspended in time. The air grew thick with urgency as shadows began to undulate wildly around her, the ethereal glow revealing glimpses of what had once been her home. "Why should I?" I croaked, caught between instinct to flee and a morbid curiosity that anchored me to her. "What did you do?" Her expression shifted, a flicker of despair growing into desperation. "Am bound by chains forged from my own choice, tethered to this cursed place. The darkness is hungry, but it's feeding on the stories of those like you who think they can leave." A shiver clawed its way down my spine at her words. The report of unearthly laughter echoed from somewhere deeper within the shadows, closing in like the jaws of a trap. With every passing heartbeat, doubt slithered through me. Was she a victim or a harbinger? "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice shaky, as the atmosphere thickened with the stench of festering despair. "Release me," she implored, pleading. "You must listen to the others. They've known the truth, and their cries will lead you to salvation or doom." Before I could muster a response, shadows rippled violently around us, the air roiling with a furious energy. I turned to run, but as I did, the ground gave way beneath me, a disorienting drop swallowed in utter blackness. I landed hard, breathless, stumbling into a vast, cavernous space where the echo of tortured whispers filled the air. "Join us," they hissed, a symphony of lost souls entwined in a cacophony of madness. "Here, we are never alone." A dart of far-off light caught my eye, pulsating like a heartbeat in the distance. Compelled by an insane drive, I pushed further into the abyss, driven by an inexplicable yearning to understand. Each step felt both freeing and damnable, for as I ventured deeper, the whispers frayed at the edges of my sanity, gnawing at my resolve. Suddenly, the ground shifted beneath me. I stumbled, catching myself just in time to witness shape after shape tumbling out from the darkness. They unfurled into manifestations of horror-twisted forms mingled with familiar faces, mouths opened in silent screams. Among them stood the woman once more, her face now a vision of agony, her pleading eyes glowing with recognition. "Stop!" I gasped, clutching my head against the piercing insanity. "What do you want from me?" "The same thing you want," she bellowed, the enormity of her truth crashing over me like a tidal wave. To break free of the chains, to uncover the truth kept buried, but at what cost? In that moment, I felt the raw energy of dread coil around me, penetrating my mind and binding me in its unfathomable grip. A blinding flash illuminated the room, revealing an immense, writhing figure emerging from the shadows, a grotesque outline swathed in darkness. It pulsated with hunger, and in that instant, I understood this was not just a prison, but a living entity, feeding off our deepest fears. It lifted its jagged head and roared, a sound deadlier than any natural storm, its voice an amalgamation of all the screams startlingly familiar to me, all speaking in a dreadful chorus, saying the one thing I couldn't comprehend. "Join us." I felt the ground beneath me quaking with the weight of despair. The figure lunged forward, its grotesque maw widening to impossibility, and just before I had lost myself to its encroaching darkness, one awful thought surged through my mind. What if the brutality I had sought to escape was nothing compared to the fate that awaited those who gave in? A flicker of warmth ignited in my chest, and with a clarity that felt almost divine, I realized something could tear open the veil sudden. rebellion surged through me. Just as I steeled myself for confrontation, everything went black. And then, I heard another voice familiar and echoing through the shadows. Remember me. Before I could fully process the implication, the darkness yawned wider, engulfing everything, leaving me on the precipice of complete oblivion. The void withdrew, leaving me gasping on a cold stone floor, the dampness soaking through my clothes. A sudden silence, absolute and suffocating, draped over me like a shroud. I struggled to open my eyes, the shadows still clinging to their familiar forms, yet in the stillness, I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching, waiting. Every breath tasted of iron and dread, the air thick with a palpable tension. I pushed myself up, glancing around the dimly lit chamber. Walls of crumbling stone loomed around me, interlaced with vines that twisted like a network of veins snaking up decrepit pillars. Flickering torches lined the perimeter, casting restless shadows that danced in mocking glee. As I stood, the whispers coalesced into distinct forms, swirling around the edges of my consciousness, painting vivid images of faces long forgotten. I recognized them, the ones who had vanished without a trace. Their expressions were a medley of horror and despair, and for a fleeting moment, their silent mouthing of words formed a twisted symphony that sent chills coursing down my spine. "Join us," they echoed, their ethereal voices unifying into an incantation that resonated like a haunting melody. A shudder traversed my skin as I pressed my back against the wall, feeling the cold stone seep into my bones. Then, from the shadows emerged a figure, cloaked in darkness. It moved with an unnatural grace, gliding past the ethereal firelight that cast flickering images across its features. I squinted, trying to discern its form, and recognized the delicate arch of its brow, the haunting beauty glistening with dark secrets. The woman, the spectral figure from before, stood before me, her eyes now incandescent pools of flame. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice softer yet layered with unyielding dread. "This place, it's a trap of forgotten dreams and forsaken souls." "Why is this happening?" I gasped, the panic rising again. "What do you want?" "Those who have fallen before you are no more than tools," she replied, her voice trembling with the weight of shared history. "You were drawn here, like a moth to flame. But the truth, it is a price they cannot afford." The shadows shifted around her, swirling as if they were alive, feeding off the tension that crackled in the air. Before I could respond, something shifted behind her, deeper within the cavernous expanse. Dark tendrils of shadow began to unfurl, snaking outwards, like the fingers of a monstrous hand emerging from beneath the earth. I felt a low vibration humming through the floor, my heart sinking to the rhythm of dread that enveloped me, clawing at rationality. "Stop it!" I shouted, struggling to keep my voice steady. "You're tormenting these souls. What do you want?" "Want?" She laughed, a sound sharp and cold enough to chill my bones. "I yearn. I yearn for the stories they hide, secrets born of bitterness and heartbreak, each a sliver of hope snatched away. And you're different." As her gaze locked onto mine, I felt a sharp sting in my mind, like a pinprick that widened into an unbearable pressure. Vivid visions flooded my consciousness, lives marred by betrayal, love ripped apart, monstrous deeds cloaked in the guise of innocence. Each revelation cut deeper, unraveling parts of my past I had thought buried. "Your secrets resonate, don't they?" She leaned closer, the shadows twisting around her fingers, weaving like dark lace. "They fuel this place. They bridge worlds. They can be liberated or consumed." Through the suffocating haze, terror rose anew within me, realization that being pulled into this realm meant confronting more than just the ghosts of the lost. My very essence stood on the precipice of being devoured by my own truths. Suddenly, the shadows surged forth, thrumming with power, as cries of anguish erupted from the air, wrapping around me like a noose. I fought against their grip, but the chilling sensations pulled me inward, the very essence of my fears clawing to reclaim me. Desperation clawed at my throat as I tried to scream, but the cacophony drowned out my voice, overwhelming me with its insatiable hunger. Silhouette after silhouette pressed against me, their faces contorted in pain, pleading yet fierce. Together, they swarmed toward the core of dark energy pulsating at the center of the chamber. "No! I won't let you take me!" I yelled, the words tumbling from my lips as I stumbled backward, searching for an escape, for some way to sever the connection before it consumed me whole. In that moment, I felt Ida's surge of rebellious energy coiling within me, ready to explode outward. Just as I summoned the will to fight back, the ground trembled violently, and the grotesque figure I'd glimpsed before materialized from the depths of darkness, its eyes deep wells of void fixed on me, and I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming dread wash over me as it moved closer, jaws gaping wider than reason allowed. The echoes of the lost swirled around me, crying out for release, and in that heartbeat just before the figure lunged, one haunting phrase wrapped around my mind like a vice: dive in or lose yourself. As the void opened before me, I was left teetering on a razor-thin line between salvation and annihilation. And the last thing I saw before the crushing darkness enveloped me was the woman's agonized face, as if warning me of the horrors yet to come. The darkness consumed me, wrapping around my body like an icy grip, pulling me deeper into a fathomless abyss. Time ceased to exist. There were no sounds or images, only an oppressive solitude that clawed at my sanity. In that void, the memories of my life flashed before me, each frame distorted and punctuated by the gnawing sensation of dread. Faces I knew, friends, family, each twisted into nightmares, whispering secrets that were never meant for me to hear. With an anguished scream left unvoiced, I felt the pressure of their stories, their traumas, surge within me like a tidal wave. Just as I thought I'd be swept away, sharp fragments of light pierced through the relentless dark, illuminating grotesque horrors on all sides. Twisted shapes writhed in the corners of my vision, just beyond the reach of clarity. They screeched and howled, their sounds a jarring cacophony laden with sorrow. Welcome to their world, came a whisper, dripping like venom into my ear. Out of the shadows, the woman appeared again, her fiery eyes glowing with ethereal malice. "You wondered too long, did you not?" Her voice echoed, reverberating off unseen surfaces, creating a chilling symphony. "You siphoned their pain, their secrets, and now you belong to them. No. I stumbled back, the ache in my chest growing sharper as my heart raced. "I didn't mean to summon this. It does not matter," she replied, her lips curling into a sinister smile. "You are enmeshed in this tapestry of despair." The shadows surged in response, undulating as if alive, feeding on my fear. My legs felt weak beneath me, and I sank back against a stone wall that pulsed with sinister heat. Suddenly, the chamber transformed me to a grotesque kaleidoscope of colors and shadows blending into a nightmarish landscape. Bodies of the lost flickered in and out of focus, their faces twisted in anguish, reaching for me with skeletal hands. I recognized them now, those who had vanished, their lives extinguished in this accursed place, forever bound to its malevolence. "Help me!" I heard their voices woven into a haunting song, striking chords of guilt within my heart. "Don't let it take you." But the woman merely laughed, a sound so monstrous it made the stones tremble. "They are simply echoes, echoes of what you may become," she taunted, her presence swelling like a storm. "Feed on their grief, or surrender to your fate." In that moment, I realized this labyrinthine chamber was more a prison than a mere meeting of souls. Less about the physical space, and more about the voracious hunger of the shadows, and their thirst for stories. Each echo bore witness to their darkness. It was a feast, a grotesque gathering of lost narratives, all clamoring for recognition. Fury ignited within me, mingling with terror as I fought against the torment. I had come too far to be devoured without a fight. What I needed was not escape, but understanding. I squared my shoulders, raising my voice against the darkness that threatened to swallow me whole. I refuse to play your game. I will not become a victim of yesteryear's tragedies. My breath was ragged, but defiance surged like a flame in my chest. Then embrace the truth? The woman hissed, and the shadows roared, a furious storm of sorrow erupting around me. Face the horrors that bind you. With a rush of energy, I plunged further into the depths of consciousness me own, and the first revelation crashed into me like a tidal wave. The faces of my family flickered with vibrance, then fell into the patterns of abandonment and grief that shaped me. Their burdens were woven into the very fabric of my being. I flinched, recoiling from the knowledge, but it became impossible to separate their pain from mine. In that raw exposure, I felt the thread of my destiny beginning to unravel. I cannot bear this, I screamed, drowning in despair. But the shadows persisted, slithering closer, tightening their grip. Then let it go, let the memories fade into the dark, the woman crooned, her eyes alight with an unsettling gleam. Or transform into a part of this realm. Let them carry you to freedom. As the weight of the truth bore down upon my chest, I saw one final glimpse of Aurora figure rising from the churning abyss beyond the shadows. It was me. My face twisted in rage, anguish, and acceptance, a frayed representation of the life I had lived. A living reflection of my own fears and weaknesses. The realization struck like lightning, blinding and paralyzing. There was no escape. I was entangled in a cycle that would not break. Dive in or lose yourself. The haunting refrain echoed once more as everything around me darkened, the grotesque figure pulling my doppelganger closer into the abyss. With a final, wrenching scream, I realized that losing myself would mean giving in to the horrors of this place. But fighting for control, what would that cost me? The abyss not only stretched beneath me but began to roar, pulling me down into its churning depths, threatening to envelop all that I was. The last thing I remembered as I was swallowed whole was the woman's cruel laughter reverberating in my mind, entwined with a whispered warning that hinted at far worse horrors yet to unfold. And then everything faded to black, leaving me hanging on the precipice of an unknowable fate. I awoke, bleary-eyed and trembling, the remnants of darkness still clinging to my mind like cobwebs. From an unfamiliar corner of shadowed space, I forced myself upright, desperate to snap the chains of despair that bound me. I had emerged, yet I felt no relief, only an oppressive weight pressing hungrily on my chest. The room was dimly lit, silence filling every crack and cranny. The air was heavy with a palpable presence, an atmosphere ripe with the ashen scent of fear and regret. Landmarks flickered in and out of focus, familiar yet disorienting. Could it be my own home? But the shadows had shifted, coiling around the very walls that had once offered comfort and safety. No, not again. I stumbled forward, the chill seeping deeper, gnawing at my resolve. The walls creaked, whispering secrets that curled like smoke before me as memories pulsed anew within my mind. The flickering of the TV, the desperate pleas of souls trapped in a narrative not their own, the crushing grip of despair. But the suffocating presence began to shimmer with familiarity, morphing into something darker, a shape that danced just at the edge of my vision. I whirled around, desperate to confront whatever specter haunted me now. But in the gloom, I caught sight of her again, the specter from my nightmares, her face a mask of twisted ecstasy and pain. "You returned," she smiled, her voice a sultry caress that sent a shiver down my spine. "Welcome back to the real horror." I staggered backward, dread swelling in my throat. "What have you done?" I choked out, the haunting reality of her words clawing at the very fabric of my sanity. "This can't be real." "Ah, but it is," she hissed, gliding forward with an unearthly grace. "You are part of this now. The darkness isn't merely a place, but a state of being. Every story you've encountered, every moment of agony you've witnessed, has tethered you to this very essence." Her laughter caressed the air like a viper's hiss. "You feasted on their anguish, and now they feast on you." As her words sank in, I felt a pulsy, a searing warmth radiating from the pit of my stomach, a connection to the darkness that coiled around us, binding us through stories of torment and despair. I gazed at my trembling hands, feeling the weight of lives lost, their burdens unfolding around me. I was not just an observer, I had become a participant in their never-ending saga woven into the very fabric of this nightmare. No. I screamed, a wave of defiance bubbling up from the depths of my core. I was not the only one in this. I could reclaim my choice. The shadows rumbled in response, their hunger wailing a cacophony that swirled around me, beckoning me to succumb. Join us. Embrace your fate, the whispers cajoled. But I would not yield. The echoes of lost souls morphed into a haunting harmony, their cries merging as I felt images blurring into existent faces of loved ones I had abandoned, fears I had buried deep within. Each flicker struck at my resolve, and I recoiled, suddenly overwhelmed. Confronting it all was like gazing into a mirror that promised nothing but sorrow. You cannot escape who you are, she smirked, eyes glinting with cruel delight. No matter how hard you fight. Do you understand? Rage ignited within me, a flickering fire in the suffocating darkness. I would not be swallowed whole, not by the memories, not by her. With a guttural roar, I lunged toward her, knowing then that I would either confront this horror or be consumed by it completely. I refused to end like this. I charged, but as I reached for her, the world distorted. The ground shifted beneath me, shadows rising, within a surge of malevolent energy tugging me backward. The walls felt too close now, closing in as anguish seeped into every crevice. No. I gasped, clawing at the air, fighting with every ounce of strength. Just as the darkness latched onto my limbs, I felt something else, a pulse of warmth intertwining with my own soul. The longing, the stories of pain, could I channel them for strength? With a force of will I had yet to realize, the voices of the lost burgeoned, intertwining with my spirit, summoning bravery from the heart of my own fears, and in that very moment, I found clarity. Rather than flee from or fight against the darkness, I had to embrace it, understand the trauma that conjoined us all. In turn, the shadows trembled, caught off guard by my defiance. That glimmer of recognition, the truth of our shared stories, provided a moment of fragile peace amidst the chaos. But peace would not last long. Suddenly, the shadows recoiled, rumbling with a ferocity that sent shivers down my spine. You cannot take their stories. The woman shrieked, her form warping in torment, a tempest of rage ascending within her. They shall remain with me, not if I can help it. I screamed back, digging deep into the flickering warmth of hope, seizing every fragmented memory, and weaving them into a shield of light that expanded around me. The glowing force rippled outward, illuminating the chamber in brilliant luminescence that momentarily stilled the tide of shadows. Yet even as I stood, grounded in the light, I saw with dismay the familiar faces of those lost echoes of moments past just beyond the threshold of illumination. They remained, their bodies engulfed in desperate shadows, clawing at the edges of my perception with outstretched hands. "Help us!" they wailed in Yuda's and sorrow blending with anger, pleading in a terrible symphony. "You think you are free?" The woman snarled, the very ground trembling as shadows surged with renewed malice. "Your fate was sealed the moment you sought the truth." A cacophony of anguished screams encased me, reverberating through the light that shielded me, until the moment it flickered and dimmed, a single heartbeat caught in the snare of darkness. I watched in horror as figures withdrew, revealing the contours of an even greater horror, a mass of agony pulsating like a living nightmare, swirling within the dark. It consumed every ounce of light, digging deeper, drawing closer. Its voice roared, a brutal reminder of all I sought to escape. True freedom comes through acknowledgement of your darkest truths. Join us, or wither away. The horror surged forward, a conflation of all that I had witnessed manifesting, ingrained in the fabric of my fears. For every fragment that broke within it, I felt a tether snapped, a connection pulled from my very essence. I gasped as realization struck. The light I fought for wasn't some external force, it had to come from within me, forged from my combined will and acknowledging each wound that shaped my story. It could offer transformation, not just for me, but for every soul trapped in these shadows. I will not succumb. I howled, summoning the memories of love and loss, embracing the very essence of who I was, and who I had wanted to become. I could not erase the scars, but I could reshape them into a weapon, a conduit, something powerful enough to drive the darkness away. With a blinding flash, the cavern erupted with brilliance, light cascading outward in a wave, illuminating the tortured faces that hovered nearby. The shadows screamed, recoiling, trying to shield themselves from the radiance that surged forth, igniting long-buried hopes among the lost. As light clashed against darkness, I felt the walls around me shattering like glass. Every memory I had released poured forth like torrential rain, forging a bridge, a pathway not only for my escape, but for those forever entwined in my story. Together, entwined by truth, we rose against the tides of horror seeking to drown us. In the breathtaking sight, I dared to believe, we are not lost. We are the architects of our fate. That single thought resonated through the chamber, erupting into a phoenix of light. Together, yet, in the final throes of our uprising, I felt the shadows close in once more, their claws latching onto the tendrils of my spirit. The woman's laughter echoed, taunting, promising that I could never escape. But somehow, between the chaos and the terror, I sent out a final pulse of light, strength solidified in every line, one last attempt to bridge the darkness and light in the depths of despair. We will not vanish. We will not join you. And the voice came rushing toward me, heart pounding, an entire tapestry of lives echoing as the spectral horror lunged forth, drawing upon its fear. What I didn't know was that the shadows were ready for war, and as the final reverberation shattered into silence, I understood that the fight was only beginning. Darkness is insidious, and beneath the veil of the familiar, horror would always lurk in wait. But there, in the recesses of my mind, I caught a glimpse of an uncharted path, a heated journey that would lead me deeper into the specters of my own making. And as I turned to face the very darkness determined to consume me, one chilling thought exploded into my consciousness, echoing across the void. What if the true horror was never meant to be defeated, and instead, I had become its architect all along?